This is a tutorial I've been meaning to do for a little bit now, and I finally found the time to do it. So it will be on resizing objects without the use of any mods or custom content. All you really need is to use the testing cheats on cheat. So as I'm sure most of you who dabble in building or decorating know, you can already resize objects by pressing the shift and bracket buttons. So you can resize objects up, meaning you increase them in size, and then you can also decrease them in size, but only down to what the original size was. So you can't decrease it any lower than this. I'm just gonna leave it here. But there is another way you can actually resize objects up or down in many cases. So like I said, you just need to have testing cheats on active, and you also need to be in live mode. So you'll need to have a sim on your lot. Obviously, if it's a house lot, you already probably have your family living there, but if it's a community lot, you can always just have your sim come over and do this. So what you would do is you would press shift and click on the object, and then you should have two options if you have test and cheats enabled on. So reset objects and set as head, and set as head is what you'll be clicking. So as you can see, it puts the object on your sim's head. So what you can then do is shift click on your sim and reset object. So it resets your sim and also the object. And as you can see, this object has been increased in size, but it is not as large as if I manually increase that one in size using my keyboard. As a rule of thumb, big objects are normally scaled down when you do this. So if I do this to this large sculpture, you can see it becomes much smaller. But if you do it to a little object, it will normally scale up in size. And then also, so this is the original bear, and this is the bear that I've increased in size. And this is the one that I got if I was setting the object as head. So if I increase this one in size, it will be bigger than that one. So it gives you that basically more size variety as opposed to just increasing it manually with your keyboard. So I'm gonna do this now here. So instead of having two sizes or whatever, three sizes, you can have these as well. So this is like an in-between of these two, and that one's in between those two, and so on. There are also several objects in the game that this method allows you to actually scale the object down smaller than the original size is. So I think that's really handy if you want some other decor in a smaller variety, basically. So for instance, I know that this bowl of fruit works this way, so I can set it as head. And as you can see, when I do it just set as head, it increases it in size. So it became bigger. But now if I decrease it with my keyboard, it lets me do that. So it becomes smaller than the original. So you can have a much smaller bowl of fruit as opposed to that one, if that one was too large for you. And same, for instance, this jar of olives from Dine Out. I never understood why they made it so large. But it is also another object that you can decrease in size, so it'll become smaller. So that's what it looks like when I set it as head, and then I can scale it down and it becomes nice and small. And then also this tray of cookies and whatever else, pastries. So once again, I set it as head and it's a little bit bigger, but then it lets me scale it down. And it's a nice little small tray now. And this vase too. It unfortunately doesn't work this way with every single object in the game. In most cases, more commonly, you will not be able to scale the object lower than the original size, so it will become bigger, and then if you scale it down, it'll just scale down to whatever the original was. but there are a couple objects that it does let you make them smaller. And as far as I know, the size is kept if you upload your lots or rooms or whatever, so they don't go back to the original large size. So it is safe to use if you're a builder or decorator and if you upload to the gallery. And this obviously does not tag your lots as modded, because this isn't a mod or custom content. This is just a game mechanic. I'm gonna leave this here. It's also quite useful for things like resizing large lampshades, large ceiling lampshades. So I'm gonna choose a couple here. I'm gonna use this one, then this one, and so these three. So they're obviously huge. But since they are quite large objects on their own, if I set them as head, you can see that they become much smaller. The one thing with ceiling lights is you have to be kind of careful when you do the reset object. Whoops, where are you going with that lamp? Come back here. When you reset your sim, they will drop to the floor, like underground a little bit. So this only happens with ceiling objects. It doesn't happen with regular stuff. So you'll see now it has fallen down, and it normally lets you kind of see the stem, like the cable, whatever that thing's called that it's hanging on, but I can't really see it here. So yes, like I said, you have to be careful. I think it works better if it's a room, so I'm just gonna build one here real quick. Put a light in there. Okay, I'll try again. I'll try inside the room instead of being outside. So once again, set as head, and then I reset object. Did it work? Oh, there, yeah. So you can see it dropped to the ground, but you can actually see the thing there that you can grab now. So yes, if you are doing it to ceiling lights, I would advise you do it inside a room, not outside, because when you do it outside, sometimes they just drop somewhere that you can't really grab them from. So as you can see, it made this light much smaller. Whoops, where's it gone? Oh, didn't work. Okay, so there. You can see it's much smaller now, and it would actually look decent in like a normal room as opposed to this one, because this is way too large. And same with these two. So I'm gonna set it as head, so you can see it. It's now much smaller. So I'm gonna reset my sim. Didn't work. Oh, there we go. So once again, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can kind of see them like flicking there, flickering. So I can grab it, and there's that lamp in a much smaller variation now that you can easily have in a room on the shortest ceiling setting, and it won't look ridiculous. It just looks like a nice little ceiling light. And this one as well, I'll do the chandelier. So once again, it becomes much smaller. I'm gonna reset myself. No, there we go. So once again, it's on there, flopping on the ground. So I can grab it and put it here. So yeah, so this is quite handy for things like resizing large ceiling lights, as well as resizing certain little decor to make them smaller. This method is quite experimental in that it works better on some objects than others. So for instance, from my experience, it doesn't really work on most wall-mounted stuff. So for instance, this painting from base game, if I set it as head, it becomes huge, and then if I reset it and manually scale it down, it will only scale down to what the original size was, so it will not scale down any smaller. So it doesn't really work on wall mounted stuff. So I'm gonna also try this rack of bottles. So once again, and also you can see it's a little bit glitchy, like the back there didn't scale up. So, well, it actually did on the back, but not the back of the front, if that makes sense. So yes, like I said, it works better on some stuff than others. So if I scale it down, it just scales down to the original size. It doesn't scale any lower. And same with rugs. So also they will normally become much bigger when you do that. And then if you reset them, and you scale them down, they just scale down to the original size. So you can't sadly make most wall-mounted stuff or rugs smaller than the original, like you can with some of the decor. However, one wall-mounted stuff, one wall-mounted object that does work that I know of is a TV, because I've tested it one time, so I think it's this one. So this is the original size, and if I set it as head, oh, I need to reset myself. Okay, so it became a bit bigger, but it does let me scale it down. So there, it became small. And since this is a TV, and obviously the TVs have an active effect, which is the screen when you watch it, for this object, so for this TV, the effect actually scales down with the object. So you can see the TV is now small and so is the screen. However, if you try to do this with a fish tank, so I have this one from Dine Out, and if you try to do this with it, you can see that the effect, which is the stuff that isn't actually meshed, it's just a moving graphic basically. So in this object it's the bubbles and the reeds. You can see they didn't scale down in size, even though the frame of the fish tank and the little decor inside did become smaller. And also you'll notice that the shadow is big for this object because basically the shadow didn't resize, so it's the same size as the shadow of the original object. So this is something to be kept in mind. It also affects some other stuff. I don't think it's as bad on like decor when you scale it down. However, I know for instance this lamp here, if you set it as head and then you resize it, it will actually scale down. However, the shadow won't. So you can see the lamp became small, but the shadow is still the same size as the original, so it does not look great. So yes, you do have to kind of experiment with different objects because some stuff works fine, like the TV for instance, and then the paintings don't scale down, and then some stuff does scale down but the effect doesn't. So yes, it is quite random. Also, I guess the last thing I will show you is how it affects things like trees and bushes. So from my experience, it normally just tends to scale them down in size, which I think is quite handy. Once again, if you want to have more size variety and also if you just want a bit smaller stuff. So I'm gonna show these two trees and grab some bushes. So I'm gonna grab this grass and maybe some kind of flowery object. Let's do this bush from the garden stuff pack thingy. So, oops. If I set these as head, you see that they become smaller. So this tree here is now nice and small. And same with this one. So yeah, it's just, I think it's quite helpful if you want to have smaller objects and or just more size variety. So for instance, if you're landscaping a garden or something and you want to use the same tree, you'll be able to have more sizes now. So you could have like this tree in its original size and then the increased size and then also the smaller variety if you set it as head. And then you can also increase that one in size too and so on. So basically it just gives you a little bit more flexibility with sizes. Also these two objects, so the grass, you can see it became much smaller. And then this bush here, it actually didn't seem to have worked on it. I don't know, I think it did become a tiny bit smaller, but not much. Surprisingly, I was expecting it to become a lot smaller. So as you can see, it is a bit smaller, but not that much. So I'm gonna try a different bush. Let's do this one. This one from base game. So yes, like I said, it's quite random with how certain objects are affected by this. Some scale down fine, some don't scale down that much, some have wonky shadows or wonky effects and so on. So it is quite experimental, but I personally do quite like it. I've been using the resized ceiling lights and some decor in probably 3 of my latest lots. I think 2 of them have already been uploaded. So I personally love this. I like the ability to have more variety in sizes. I think that's everything that I wanted to show in this video. I think I've covered everything. So I hope you have found this useful and enjoyable to watch and maybe learned something new. If you like this video, perhaps you will give it a thumbs up on YouTube and maybe even subscribe to my channel. And if you are not familiar with me, I do have a simming blog on Tumblr, which will be linked in the video description. And as always, I would like to thank you for watching and I shall see you later.